What's up, friends? Today we are going to be taking a look at the XBoard V1 and V2 gloves. In this video, we're going to be comparing all of their differences and giving them both a rating. So let's jump right into it.
Make my heart beat super fast.
Let's get started with a quick segment about protective gloves. Now, there are tons of different kinds of gloves for all different kinds of sports. You've got dirt biking, regular biking, downhill skate, lifting, water sports, all kinds of things. So when we have all these, why would you go and purchase an Esk8 glove? Well, I've been looking at all different kinds of gloves on the internet, trying to figure out some reasons why these gloves exist. So let's go through some of those, and I'll try to give you guys a good idea of what Esk8 gloves are all about. I think the most similar sports to Esk8 when it comes to protection requirements are probably dirt biking and mountain biking. For me, I would say they're similar because you travel at higher speeds, and if you were to fall, you fall from a similar height. Now, obviously, dirt biking gloves require a lot more protection in terms of impact and sliding because of their higher speed, but it's the same concept. You might think that downhill skateboarding gloves with the pucks on them might be a good option for Esk8, but I'll tell you why that's probably not true later. For us in Esk8, we have some unique requirements, and I think it's about time we go through those. One of our unique requirements for Esk8 gloves is that they need to be quite maneuverable. Now, no matter what remote you end up getting, you're going to have to actuate some kind of small mechanism to go forwards, backwards, and control your board. And that usually requires pretty fine motor control, where you're either moving your thumb or your index finger, versus on a dirt bike where you're just turning your hand or pulling the clutch or whatever. Now, with gloves, you play this fun game of trading off protection for bulk and thickness in the glove. And it's just the reality of how materials work. But for our gloves, we need to be able to have maneuverability in either the thumb or the index finger in most situations. Now, if we take a look at the mountain biking community, there are actually plenty of options that offer a lot of maneuverability in those particular areas. And in fact, all the way up to when I got my XBoard gloves, I was using my Fox Dirt Paw gloves, and I still do use those with some remotes because of some issues that I'll tell you about later. Now, I don't really have any complaints about them, except that I think they could probably only survive 1, maybe 2 falls on asphalt before the leather on them would be unable to protect my hands any further. Anyways, the whole point of telling you that was just to say that maneuverability is one of the categories where Esk8 gloves can excel. While maneuverability is great though, it's only one part of the seesaw, and the other side is the actual protection. I think there are 2 major things that you need to protect yourself from when riding an Esk8. One of those is impacts, and the other one is sliding. Now, when you fall on an Esk8, you only have a couple directions that you can go, but when you fall forwards or when you fall back, you tend to stick your hands out if you're not trained in the art of falling, which is, an actual thing. So when you put your hands out in front of you, your wrists tend to bend like this, and that's really bad for them, and typically a lot of people will break their wrists when they fall off a bike or off of an Esk8. Now, there is actually a company called Nox that has thought of one solution to this problem with a very special single bend direction piece of plastic bracing that goes across the back of your hand, over your wrist, and onto your arm. This is actually present in some motorcycle gloves and one brand of Esk8 gloves. Now, this is a great option, and another option is to just wear a wrist guard, but wrist guards suck when you have to hold a remote because they are blocking part of your palm. Another way to help prevent breaking your wrist is to provide a way for the hand to transition downwards movement into sideways movement, and the way the XBoard gloves do that is using brass rivets and on the V2 gloves, a combination of brass rivets and plastic slide pucks. Now, Knox gloves do this, and Flatland 3D gloves do this, and I'm sure there's some mountain biking gloves that do this as well. But I think now is a perfect time to transition into the differences between the V1 and the V2 XBoard gloves. There are actually quite a few changes that occurred from the V1 to the V2, so I've got a list here on my phone that we're going to be going through to make sure I cover all of them. The first change is probably the most obvious change, and that is a migration of the colorway from the red, black, and blue to just a white, black, and gray. And you know, this is really more up to personal preference than anything. And I think both of the gloves look great, but if you're going for a less flashy look, obviously the black and white is a much more stealth look. The next thing that's a major change is that all of the rubber on the back of the gloves, which I guess is to help provide protection for the back of your hand, is now sewed on. And one of the problems that occurred on some of the V1 gloves, like this one right here, is that the glue actually just came off and the rubber ends up falling off in the case of this knuckle, or peeling like the back of this hand. And this is actually a pretty old glove, so not all of this is going to happen, but the way they prevented that on the new gloves is it is all completely sewn on. And if I bring it a little closer here, you can see all of the nice stitching around the different pieces of rubber. Now, one thing that isn't as obvious when you actually look at the gloves is that the Kevlar itself has been upgraded. And you'll notice this right when you put the gloves on. The actual material is a lot thicker, and you can feel the difference for sure. Even on the back of the hand, I think that's probably the most similar one, but in the palm of the hand, there's a lot more protection and it's a lot thicker, which does actually affect the glove a little bit negatively in the fact that these have a longer break-in time and they're a little bit less maneuverable. Now, next thing that you will notice that is also super obvious is that the V2 gloves now have plastic slide pucks on them. And I haven't tested these because I haven't fallen wearing these gloves yet, but I think that this would help your hand transition into a slide much better than just having the brass. Another thing while we're looking at this side is that the wrist portion of the glove has been extended quite a bit. So let me put on each of these right now and show you how much it goes. So on the left hand, we've got the V1 glove, and on the right hand, we've got the V2. As you can see, the left hand ends right at my wrist with this little flap of leather or suede or whatever the material is. And then on the right hand, the leather ends much further down. And in fact, the part where it ended on the V1 is now actual brass rivets. And that provides a lot more protection for the edge of your wrist when you fall down and hit your hand on the ground. Now, the next thing you might notice is a bit of a material upgrade across the entire glove. The inside of the V1 glove, or the palm of the V1 glove, has this suede-like material. I'm not 100% sure what it is. It might be some form of soft leather or just a different kind of suede. And it seems to be pretty durable, but it does actually rub off on the grip tape of my puck remote, and that is kind of annoying. But on the V2 gloves, almost the entire palm has been upgraded to leather, and the only parts that still have this suede-like material are the insides of the fingers and a small bit that flexes on the palm. It seems to me like this leather material on the V2 gloves is going to be a lot more durable than the suede on the V1 gloves, especially when it comes to abrasion resistance. The next thing we have to talk about is a change on the inside of the gloves to a additional mesh layer. And I'm pretty sure this mesh is the same mesh that you will find on the inside of the protective jacket that XBoard also sells. Now, when you compare that to the V1 gloves, they only have a layer of Kevlar, and that, I mean, to me it felt pretty comfortable, but I think the mesh is definitely an upgrade. The only downside with the mesh is that you can tell that it is another layer in there, and it makes the gloves a good bit warmer, which can be good in the wintertime, but in the summer, and if you have sweaty hands, it can get a little bit warm. Now, another upgrade that actually happened on the inside of the glove is not really visible, but is that they added some impact absorption foam to the palm area of the glove. And you can definitely tell the difference when you compare and squeeze the palms of the two different gloves. The V1 gloves definitely have something in there, I think partly to protect your hand from the actual rivets, but the V2 gloves actually have a impact absorption foam that is apparently, according to Xavier, very similar to the on-brand D30 impact absorption foam. While this impact absorption foam is not the actual D30, apparently it has very similar characteristics. So that's a great upgrade. And again, while it does improve the protection, it reduces the amount that you can bend the glove. And you guys will see exactly what I'm talking about in this next section. In this section, we're going to take a look at how I hold a bunch of different remotes with each of these gloves. And we'll see which ones are easy to hold, which ones have problems, and if there's any that I just can't use with these gloves. So let's get right into this next section. I'm going to try and keep it on the faster side for each of these, so if you need to, feel free to skip back and watch part again. Starting with the Maytag V2, the experience is pretty average. On the V2s, the main problem is that it's hard to reach the triggers with the thickness of the gloves. On the V1s, it really just feels pretty slippery because of the large flat area on the palm of the glove. For the Master Cho mod, our main problem on both of these gloves is that the trigger actually gets stuck on one of the other fingers. On the V2 gloves, it's especially apparent with the thicker layer of Kevlar on each of the fingers. The Mad Monkey mod is definitely the worst experience. It's very difficult to fit all three fingers on the bottom of the remote, and the trigger gets stuck on the side of the fingers. Moving over to the top view, we see similar problems, but just from a different angle. You can see on the Maytag V2 remote, I am having a difficult time actually getting my finger bent over, and over time it just feels really uncomfortable. On the Master Cho mod, the main issue here is still apparent, and you can kind of see how the finger struggles to bend around the side and reach over to the trigger. You might also see the trigger getting stuck, which is a common occurrence like I mentioned before. On the Mad Monkey, the same is still true, with it being difficult to actually grasp the whole remote. Moving on to the second set of remotes, we see the Hoyt Puck. This is actually my favorite remote experience in these gloves. With the extra support on the palm on both gloves, it just gives you a lot more confidence in holding the puck remote. Our next remote is the VX1, and this is actually a pretty good experience too because of the placement of the thumb wheel. It's fairly easy to reach on both remotes, with the only major issue being that occasionally it feels a little slippery. With the Revel remote, I would call the experience almost unusable on the V2 because it is so slippery and the shape just does not work well with the glove. It's usable on the V1, but still not the best. Finally, on our Hobby Wing remote, the experience is average, but it is plagued by the same issue as the Maytag V2 on the V2 gloves, in the fact that it's difficult to reach the thumb wheel without getting thumb fatigue. It's alright on the V1, albeit a little bit slippery. From the top view, you can see on the Hoyt Puck that it just fits perfectly into my hand with both pairs of these gloves. My favorite experience is with the V1s, but as my V2s break in more, I might change my mind. With the VX1, we see more of the same, and personally this is a very comfortable experience with the thumb lining up perfectly with the thumb wheel. Again, on the Revel remote, it's just really slippery, and it feels great in a normal hand, but with the gloves, it's just hard to hold. Finally, on the Hobby Wing remote, works pretty well, but you can see from this angle too that it's just difficult to manipulate the thumb with the extra bulk of the glove. After testing all these, I think my favorite is still the Hoyt Puck, but the FlipSky VX1 comes in a close second, and that's a great thing because there's a lot of boards using the VX1. At this point of the video, I would normally be having some closing remarks to finish up the review portion. But for this video, we're going to be doing it a little bit different. We're going to be going into the RBEM Score right now, but this time we're going to spend a little bit extra time per category since we're comparing two versions of these gloves. It's worth mentioning that the V1 gloves are actually not in production anymore, but a lot of people have bought them, so I figured it would be valuable for people to know if it's worth upgrading to the V2s. Going over the categories super quick, we've got comfort and quality, impact and slide protection, maneuverability, visibility, style, and finally price. Let's jump right into the first category. The comfort of gloves is kind of subjective, but to me it feels like the V1 and V2 gloves are in completely different worlds. The V2 are much heavier duty, and while they're great for protection, they do take a hit to comfort in my books. While I got the same exact size of each of these gloves, the V2 are a lot tighter and much harder to squeeze. This is great for protection again, but bad for remote holding, as you probably saw. It is possible that the V2s have an even longer break-in period than the V1s due to the thicker Kevlar and less compliant materials. For the V1 gloves, I'm going to go ahead and give them a 4 out of 5, and for the V2, a 3 out of 5. Next, let's talk about quality. As soon as you look at these two gloves, it's pretty apparent that the V2s are just much higher quality. The leather, Kevlar, impact foam, slide pucks, and stitched rubber are a bunch of improvements that just make the gloves better and more durable. I believe that the V2 gloves will last a lot longer than the V1, and you will likely not encounter some of the aging issues that the V1s did. In addition, if you fall, I believe the plastic pucks will do an even better job in conjunction with the brass rivets at protecting your hand and making the glove last longer. For the quality, I'm going to go ahead and give the V1s a 3 out of 5 and the V2 a 4 out of 5 because I think they still can have a little bit of improvement. Protection is our next topic, and it's pretty much the whole point of buying these gloves. As soon as you put on each of these gloves, you'll notice immediately that the V2s have a higher perceived protection and are much thicker. For impact protection, the V1 gloves have some thin layer of foam between the brass rivets and your actual palm. However, on the V2, we've got the slide pucks and the rivets, and in addition, we have what Xavier calls a D30-like impact absorbing foam in between. Now, I do wonder if the plastic pucks will create some amount of pressure points on your hand versus spreading out the load like the brass rivets, but I still think they're an improvement. Overall, the V2 glove is the winner here and gets a 4 out of 5 for impact protection, while the V1 glove gets a 3 out of 5, as I do believe some foam is better than none. Next up is slide protection, and it touches on some of the points that I've already brought up. On the V1 glove, your slide protection is a combination of the durability of the Kevlar and the brass rivets that are on your palm. However, on the V2, you get real plastic slide pucks as your primary sliders, thicker Kevlar, and brass inserts that are on your lower part of your wrist. The combination of all of these things together seems like a great solution to sliding, and I'm pretty confident that this V2 glove would have a lot of protection for you in case of a fall. In fact, here's some pain for you to watch. I'm going to test out how well each of these gloves works by sliding them on a patch of pavement. One moment. Alright, we're about to test out the XBoard V1 and V2 gloves on pretty much the worst surface possible to fall on. We've got some rough concrete and a bunch of pebbles completely covering it. If you fall on this, you're definitely ripping up your hands. So let's go ahead and put on the V1 gloves now, and we'll get right into testing this. Alright, so we're just going to go ahead and scrape these along the ground here. And I already did this 5 times, but the camera wasn't recording, so that was good. Anyway, go ahead and absolutely scrape these. And I'll show you guys what they look like afterwards. Alright, so now we've got the V2 gloves here, and this really pains me because I haven't fallen on these at all yet, but doing it for you guys. So, one thing that I immediately noticed on these is that the plastic pucks take a lot of the sliding impact, and it's actually leaving plastic on the ground here. I'm just going to do this one more time, and I'll let you guys see what it looks like. So as you can see, the V2 gloves kind of got destroyed
but that's fine. It doesn't seem like the leather really took too much of a beating. Most of the damage is concentrated on the actual slide pucks, and when I was sliding with them, it really felt like it was a nice loose slide, which is exactly what you want to prevent breaking your wrist. To be clear, I said destroyed, but these can easily take many more falls. It's just visual. Alright, so the V1 gloves actually surprisingly look better than the V2s after scraping them on the ground. All of the brass rivets are scraped up, but the red and blue fabric barely took any damage at all. So honestly, they both did really great, and I'm mostly more impressed by the V1s on how good they did. Obviously on a higher speed fall you'd see a lot more damage than this, but if you fall off while you're going slow, I guess you'll be perfectly fine too.
Alright, I hope you enjoyed that little bit of testing. I believe that the V1 glove deserves a 3 out of 5 for slide protection, and the V2 glove deserves a 4 out of 5, with the highest level of protection being an actual slide puck. That would be a 5 out of 5. Our next category is maneuverability, and this is unfortunately where the V2 gloves really start to struggle. Now, we must keep in mind that there is a possibility that my V2 gloves aren't completely broken yet, but it was time to do the review, and I think I put a good amount of miles on them already. If you're paying close attention to the remote clips, you would have noticed that my first issue is it's very difficult for me to actually reach down and grab the thumb wheel or the trigger on my thumb using the V2 gloves. Now, this really just comes down to the fact that the leather and Kevlar reinforcement around the thumb come up just a little bit too high for my finger. This might not be an issue if you have much longer thumbs, but for me it was a major problem. I was still able to make it work with some of the remotes, but for my favorite one, it just wasn't going to happen. The second problem that I ran into is the fact that it's just really difficult to hold some of the remotes with the resistance of the fingers and the thickness of the glove. Combining the thickness of the impact foam and the slide pucks and everything, it just makes it difficult to hold some of the remotes. These issues don't really present themselves as much on the V1 gloves, and I'm actually a huge fan of using the puck remote on the V1 gloves, and that's what I use every time I go out to do tricks. Now, maneuverability is really important for these gloves, and it is on a 10-point scale for each of these. For the V1 gloves, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 7 out of 10, and the V2 gloves only a 5 out of 10. Now, I'm not sure if visibility is really important to you or not on a glove, but I thought I would compare it anyway since it's one of my clothing categories. Now, the V1 gloves actually win this category by a landslide, and they use the same kind of reflective material that the XBoard protective jackets use. This material is extremely reflective and is on all 5 fingers and the back of the glove. However, on the V2 gloves, the method is changed, and maybe it's in interest of manufacturing, but they use this gray kind of rubber pigment around each of the fingers, and it just isn't reflective at all from what I can tell. There's one small strip on the back, but that's not really a redeeming grace for it. If you care about reflectivity, the V1 gloves are going to get a 4 out of 5, and the V2 only a 2 out of 5. Style is an extremely subjective category, but I thought I would rate it anyway. Honestly, to me, both of the gloves look great, and I might have a hard time picking one over the other. The colors on the V1 look really great with the brass accents, and the stealthy look of the V2s is really great too. You know, since this is really up to personal style, I think I'm just going to rate it how I feel, and I think both of them deserve a 4 out of 5. Price is one small important factor to rate on different articles of clothing, and for the V1 gloves, they currently smashed this out of the park. Coming in at only $20 for one of the last couple of pairs, you have a really great price to value ratio. Even when they were new, I still think they hold a pretty good value. For the V2 gloves, they come in at $69.99 currently, and while that does seem like a lot, it's not really that much when you compare it to the rest of the premium glove market, and especially some of the other Esk8 gloves. There's only one that I know of, but they're at a pretty similar price point. Now, for the V1 gloves, at normal price, I would say they get a 3 out of 5, and for the V2 gloves, a 4 out of 5. Combining all of these scores together, we get a composite score of 32 out of 45 for the V1 gloves and 30 out of 45 for the V2 gloves. Now, it might seem odd to you that the V2 gloves come in at a lower score, but the reality is, for me, I honestly enjoy using my V1 gloves better on a lot of different remotes. Now, these opinions may change in the future, but for right now, this is my accurate representation of the score for each of these gloves. While it might seem like these scores are a little bit low, it's really just the reality of rating on a category-based system. I do like both of these gloves and I want XBoard to succeed, but there's really just a couple of things that should probably be improved for me to love these gloves. On the V2 gloves, I really think that they need to improve the maneuverability and just make it easier to hold different types of remotes. For me, it just comes way too high on my thumb, and I can't imagine I'm the only one with this problem. Maybe they'll get better over time, but right now, this is how I feel. Now, XBoard did send these gloves to me free of charge, and I am an affiliate of XBoard. So if you would like, you can check out my discount code in the description for a few % off. This won't work on the V1 gloves, but since the V2 gloves are not on sale, it should work for them and any of the other products on their site. I've got one final comment to close out the video. I really do like that both of these XBoard gloves have a mostly full-fingered approach. Flatland 3D is their main competitor, and they've had the idea of having their full-finger gloves back in stock for a while now, but it just hasn't happened. For me, I really prefer the idea of a full-finger glove because if you're going to protect half your finger, what is the point? Anyways, I'd like to check out the Flatland 3D gloves in the future regardless, so I'll probably pick up a pair of those to do a review and rating on. If you guys have any other pieces of gear that you want me to check out, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. If you're still watching, thanks so much for watching to this point, and stay safe, keep on riding, and peace out.